Hey guys, I'm getting started on the install on the bar and skid plate. I've got the 2-inch version, but they also have a 3-inch drop and a flat skid. The flat skid needs extensive modifications. The 3-inch is basically the same drop as a factory skid. But they also do have a TJ bolt-on skid, which has all the holes pre-drilled, and it comes with a mount to basically use a stock TJ engine and trans combo. As you can see, this one has no holes because you can use any combination of engine, trans, and transfer case. You just have to make your own holes in it. You got to use your own mount. They do sell a TJ specific mount that I have as well, and I'm going to work to make it mount up and drill my own holes in it. Okay, so on the inside, it's a completely blank canvas. As I mentioned, if you have a stock TJ, Barnes has this adapter plate, and all you have to do is bolt that up to your trans mount, and then as you raise up your skid on your install, you can kind of locate it exactly where you need, and then you can go up, you can mark out your holes, and then you can punch it out exactly where you need your holes at.
Just so you can get an idea of what I'm kind of talking about, here's how that adapter mount bolts up to the factory mount on the skid plate. And so now we just have to raise up the skid plate and have to mark out where we have to put the bracket holes. Another thing you have to do is you have to remove the whole mount assembly piece that bolts onto the transmission. And that's because you have to cut the exhaust mount. If you just try to jack up everything, the exhaust is going to get slammed up into the floor. Actually, this is probably going to hit first. What a lot of people do is they cut it in between these two holes and actually bolt it together using those. I'm probably going to cut it there, but I'm going to find out the exact position I need, and I'm going to weld it up together. The way that I'm holding up the exhaust is I just ran a strap across the frame, and that keeps the exhaust from dropping down after I remove that mount. I've now hacked it off with my little Evolution chop saw, and you can see that you could use the bolt holes. You could also cut it again and shorten it up and then weld it in place. So once I get everything set on the skid, I'll decide which way I want to go.
Guys, I cannot emphasize enough how perfectly this thing fit. The very first time that I got it into place and got it aligned, every single hole fit perfectly. As you can see, it is dead nut straight. Couldn't believe it. My last skid plate, it was a Genrite that was 3 times the cost of this, and pretty much every hole had to be massaged. Just a mess. This one, it's like it was made by Jeep. All the clearances are good. You can see none of the brackets are hitting. The exhaust isn't in the way. I mean, this thing just fit perfectly. I'll show you the backside now. Here on the backside, you can see the same thing. All the clearances are perfect. There's no issues. I do not have a muffler, so potentially if you have a really big muffler like the factory one, you could run into that. But I didn't have that issue. Here you can see the bracket. You can kind of get a Sharpie in there to hit it with an outline, which is what I did. So I'll move on to that now.
To show you how I did my marks on the skid plate, once I had it bolted up into place, there's not enough space to actually mark the holes, but I was able to get a Sharpie around and kind of outlined my plate. So I should be able to set it in there pretty much where I had it, like that. And punch my holes and drill out the holes to mount the bracket to the skid plate, and then use a hole saw to mount out the holes underneath. The skid's almost ready to go back in the Jeep. I've got it painted, I got all the holes drilled. I'll flip it over in a second and show you that. So the holes have all been drilled. The ones that hold the plate have been recessed a little bit, if you can see that. The hole saw I used was 1 1/4, and that was a complete pain in the ass. Get a plasma cutter if you don't have one. That should allow us to access the nuts once we have the skid plate open into place. The only other thing we have to do, we have to slide it under the Jeep, bolt it back up one more time, and then have to locate the exhaust hanger where we need it on the bracket and weld it up. Okay, so we have the skid mounted up. We have the trans mount inside the holes. As you can see, all of our measurements came out pretty good. We have access to all of our bolts there. All we have to do is measure our trans bracket up to the exhaust hanger, measure that out, weld it on, and we should be good to go. I do have a Novak cable shifter coming for the transfer case, so I will do a video when I install that. But for now, we are almost wrapped up on the skid plate. So after I got it measured up, I needed to take about a 1/4 inch off of this bracket. So now I just need to clean it up a little bit and tack it into place, and we'll be ready to reinstall it. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need, just 2 tacks. It doesn't hold a lot of weight. I never had any issues on the Rubicon. I don't think there's any need to weld the whole thing across. That just makes it harder if you ever have to relocate anything in the future. That should be plenty strong to hold up the exhaust. So the skid plate is in. We just have a few more steps. We have to check all of our driveline angles now. Because you move everything up the drive.
Okay guys, this is where things went really wrong. If you do a tummy tuck, there's a lot of different issues that you have to handle at the same time. One of those is the shocks on the rear axle. I knew about this ahead of time, but I was hoping on an LJ I would not run into the same issue as a TJ. That turned out to not be the case. The issue is the body of the shock starts to hit the spring perch as you have to rotate the axle up. And you have a couple of different ways to address this. You can either cut the spring perch or get some type of relocation bracket or invert the shocks. I didn't have the option to cut the perch because my spring took up the entire perch. I tried to invert the shock, but I still did not have enough clearance. Fortunately, there was a guy a couple hours away who had a set of metal cloak springs that I knew from my Rubicon are small enough in the rear that I can cut the bracket. So I hopped in my truck and made a 5-hour round trip after working all day with a 3-year-old. Everything is now 99% done. There was a lot of work that was done off camera. The spring install, repositioning the axles, the pinion, all that was done off camera because I just want to focus on the skid plate. And man, like, look at the difference in this skid plate. It's only 1.5 inches, maybe 2 or so inches if you have an 03 to 06 skid plate, but that extra clearance is going to help a ton off-road, and the skid plate install went fantastic. I'll show some under footage here so you can get an idea of how everything looks all together. And as I mentioned, once you tuck up the drive line, you have to redo your pinion angles. So the rear is about a 1/2 degree below the drive shaft, and the front is a 1/2 degree above. That's about the recommended spec. I'm going to show the rear shocks real quick. Just they're inverted. The perch was cut. You can see I have the space now with the smaller metal cloak spring. I knew that was going to be the case. And man, those springs, they were great on the Rubicon. And just look at that stance now. With the 35s and the 1-inch body lift, it has a really good stance. I'm really happy with how this came out. So if you guys have any questions, leave a comment. I'll try to answer as soon as I can. And if you guys like this, please consider giving me a subscribe, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video.